All right, so let's do that. So, a little preview. So, anyone who says it's easy is lying. When Susie called me last fall and presented the idea, hey, why don't we present or submit a proposal to ACMP to talk about enterprise change management, I was flattered. And I told her, Susie, I'm flattered. But our story is nowhere near ready to talk about. We've only written a few chapters. There was a long pause, very quiet on the other end of the phone, and Susie said, very politely, Amy, the enterprise change management story is never done. In that moment, my professional world took a cataclysmic shift. I realized that this whole time I had been striving, thinking that one day there would be a finish line. All this hard work would one day mean I would cross over and call victory. And in working on this proposal and in this presentation, what I have learned is that I needed to shift my metaphor. This is not a story that has a beginning, a climax, and a nice ending with the end at the bottom of the page. This is a long, winding journey that never ends. And I don't say that to be discouraging. If anything, it should be encouraging to all of us in this room, because not one of us picked this profession because we don't like challenge, right? We're here, we must be challenge hungry, or else we're just plain mad to be doing this role. But it should be encouraging to you, because this will be a challenge that goes on and on. The landscape will change, the sites will look different, and the destinations will offer you different aspects everywhere you go. To prove my point about how hard this is me on my first day of employment at Citrix, almost 6 years ago. I look so young and eager. Get to wear this around every day, show the security guard, and he looks at it and he's like, that's not you. So I arrived at Citrix fired up. I had just attended the very first Prosci conference that we heard Donna mention this morning, 150 change practitioners in Orlando at another Gaylord resort, coincidentally. And I had heard about this thing called enterprise change management. It was going to be the new thing. It was taking change management from the project level and looking at the capability level, embedding it as a strategic capability within an organization. Now, I had moved from a manufacturing environment, the beer industry, into high tech, and things were moving quickly. Within my first week there, they had a significant reorg announced via an email to a handful of people, and I knew I was in a very different world. That type of change in my previous life would have required a well-thought-out communication plan. So I thought, what better place? This ECM thing, this is really going to take hold here, and it's going to be done in 12 months. Well, this is me now. This is how... This is how I feel most days, no kidding. The journey has aged me mentally, physically, emotionally, but my team will tell you right here in the front, I still have that same conviction that this is the right thing to do for Citrix. I truly believe what the promise is, that having an enterprise change capability will make us faster, more agile, and better able to compete in a very, very difficult and competitive market.
So the goal today is, because I feel like a lot of us probably feel like little old ladies more than we care to admit, right? This journey can be hard. And so our goal today is to help refuel you on that journey by sharing the stories from the Citrix journey, some of our experience as Prosci working with other organizations who have done this really well and successfully and who have also struggled. The goal here is, again, not to discourage you, but rather to encourage you. When we come to ACMP, we see a lot of success stories, and those are awesome. We need to see them to know that the success is possible. But we also oftentimes we get a highlight reel. And if in our own stories we're struggling, that can be hard to take. So our goal today is to share with you some of the real challenges. Let's get real about what this looks like, and also give you some time and space to reflect on those concepts and apply them to your own story. We don't want this to be us just sharing information. We're going to have time throughout the session for you to reflect and look for the own opportunities that you have after you leave the conference.
So here's our long, winding road, lots of twists and turns, and what we have framed this presentation around is really 4 road signs. These are the 4 truths that we have come to find in our own journey and that are backed up by the client stories and research that Prosci has. The first is one I just mentioned: surrender the hope of a finish line. So if you were like me and you walked into this room thinking that one day those 26.2 miles would be over and you'd get a beer at the end of the finish line, it's not going to happen. So let's just get that out of the way right now. The other three truths are: be bold, find the energy, and don't go alone. And we'll be digging into each of these separately. If you haven't already voted, we will also be taking a challenge that is very important to those of you in this room. So take a moment and use Poll Everywhere to weigh in on what you want to make sure that we are able to discuss as a larger group.
So to do that, go ahead and text one of these codes to vote for that option to 22333. Or if you open up your browser, you can go to pollev.com/adcar. So that'll stay up as we keep going. You can vote.
All right.
Cool. So the second road sign is be bold. Deciding to build change capability is a daring adventure. That's what you're signing up for. And there's definitely risk associated with it. And we want to talk about one area of building capability that is especially risky, but also can yield high reward. And that is leadership and sponsorship. So no one should be shocked, right? The leadership and sponsorship is coming up. It is the number one high impact thing that contributes to a successful enterprise capability. But there are some differences and some things that we really want to keep in mind as we look at leadership and sponsorship of a change capability. Oftentimes in changes, we can get away with what we call passive buy-in, right? Leaders, they can be supportive in word, but the change doesn't really require that they do anything differently. A change capability requires very active buy-in from leaders, because inherently a thriving change capability has leaders who are change capable themselves. And we know from the research and probably from our own experience that most leaders don't grow into their roles just knowing how to be effective sponsors of change, right? And so we need to help leaders change their mindset and their behaviors in order to equip the organization as a whole to be more change capable. We cannot get away with passive buy-in when we're building a capability, and we have to be able to inspire leaders to lean in and to change the way that they lead change. So there's a couple of different things also that in normal changes we see often a primary sponsor and a coalition. That's also very important when we're talking about a capability. We do need a bold champion who's going to spearhead the effort, who can flex some influence across the organization, but we also need the coalition, and the coalition is especially important because our research shows us that that bold champion, the primary sponsor of the capability leaving the organization, is the number one reason that a capability regresses, that an organization actually decreases in their change maturity. Has anyone seen this happen at an organization? Seeing head nods across the room? So we really want to protect our investment. If we're going to put all the hard work that this takes, we want to make sure that we can protect it and we don't have a single point of failure. So we want to talk a little bit more, too, about what this bold sponsorship looks like. How do we get people to lean in? So we have a great example from an organization that we're working with right now. They're a Fortune 50 company, and they are a giant in their market, yet emerging technology and emerging competitors, even in the past couple of years, are threatening their position, but also the relevance of their core business. And so the chief HR officer, we'll call him Bob, he is sponsoring their capability. And he took a look at all of the changes that are happening and all the changes that are coming, and he decided that something had to be done. So when we're looking for that bold champion, we're asking someone to take a pretty big step. We're asking them to put a lot of professional credibility on the line, and at that level, we're asking them to make change management a part of their legacy that they're going to leave on the organization. So Bob decided that change management is going to become a part of his legacy and what he's going to leave behind. Hopefully not too soon, because we still need him right now. So we start coming at this from a few different angles. We're supporting key projects, but we also open up the conversation with their senior leaders because we know that is going to get us a lot of bang for our buck in these early stages. So we set up a series of engagements to start the conversation. What is change? What's change management? What's your role as a leader? And Bob stands up and he says, if you want to be relevant in my part of the organization in 3 years, you will learn how to do this well. And what he did was tap into the very thing that was keeping pretty much everyone in that room up at night. And that's where our bold champion really helps us, is navigating the executive WIFM, right? Because we're still dealing with people, they still have a what's in it for me requirement, but we need to be able to tap into what's going to be meaningful for them. So those bold statements are great, and we need them. But we also know that talk is cheap, and we need that to be backed up with bold action. So Bob did a great job of starting to immediately demonstrate what he was asking of his peers and of his reports. He kicked off that session, but he also sat through it and engaged and talked to people. And then he kicked off the next session, and he'd already been through it, so he didn't need to stay, but he sat and he went through the whole thing again. And he kicked off, and then he stayed, and he kicked off, and then he stayed. And he started demonstrating right from the beginning what it means to be an active and visible leader who's there working directly with people on the same change that he's asking them to make. And we made huge progress from that action in both building the coalition and influencing the behaviors of those leaders, because we had the bold sponsor who was willing to take that step.
So, who has an absence of a bold sponsor in their own enterprise change management journey? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, that makes me feel so much better. That means I'm not alone. We at Citrix don't have bold approach to sponsorship from the top down. Just like a sparkler really lights the fire and burns down, ideally, everything we know about how to do this well and really accelerate enterprise change management within our organizations is get that sponsorship burning from the top down. But what happens when that's not the case? What happens when we need to ignite that sponsorship and be bold in how we do it ourselves so that we can actually see results burning bottom up? We do this, we get bold ourselves. In February of 2015, our organization went through quite a few leadership changes at the top. Our chief HR officer and general counsel was moved into a position called chief of staff to the CEO. We all received an email announcing the change, and there were 4 bullet points that were included in his job. The 4th said that he would be accountable for building company-wide capability in change management in order to compete in a dynamic industry and market. Well, you can bet we celebrated. That email got forwarded around so quickly. It's like, oh, hallelujah, finally we found our sponsor. And we waited. And then we waited, and then we kind of gave up a little bit. And by April, we hadn't seen anything really change. So, like many of you, I hope you do this, I figured out some rituals to fill my cup and help make me more resilient before I go into my workday. And for me, that's taking a short run at sunrise to beat the South Florida heat. And on one particular day, I asked myself a question that's become important to me in my career. It's a little cliche, but I'm not a natural-born risk taker. And so this has actually really pushed me out of my comfort zone, probably more times than I like it to. But I asked myself, today, what would I do today if I was not afraid? And the answer came so quickly. I would email that chief of staff to the CEO. I'd reintroduce our team and ask him how we might help him achieve his objectives. Sending an email, right? We send thousands. But why had it taken me 3 months to do that? Well, I'll tell you, I don't email our C-level all that often. They're typically not the ones sponsoring our initiatives. And I had a very flimsy relationship at best. So for me, it felt like it took a little courage. But I did it immediately, and 8 minutes, no joke, I got a response. And this is what it said. Hey, Amy, let's have coffee. I'll arrange. Thanks for reaching out. Dave. Not even David, Dave. We were friends. Dave. So.
But BFF Dave.
BFF Dave. So how easy was that? And sure enough, we had coffee, and we had some great conversations, and we had some great plans. But then priorities shifted, and Dave has now transitioned into a lovely life of retirement. So we're back to the drawing board. And some of the lessons that we have learned along the way, and also from data and research and hearing stories from all of you, is that now we're not going after a single person. We have 3 distinct possibilities for fabulous executive sponsors. So we're talking to all of them. We're going to start with a coalition rather than start with an individual, which will hopefully help us mitigate the challenge that that individual will move on to retirement, like our friend Dave did. For us, we believe that this is the next thing we're going to try. We continue to find flowers in the midst of the weeds. Good things come up from unexpected places. And one of the real key pieces in putting this presentation together, Scott McAllister at Prosci said, he said, you know, how many times is it us who hold ourselves back? It's okay if the answer is no, but what's not okay is not to ask. What's not okay is not to ask.
So as we said, we don't want this to be us just sharing information. We want to give you a few minutes here. If you're at a table, there are handouts in the middle. Please grab one. And we were going to give you a few minutes to think about this concept of being bold, especially as it relates to sponsorship in your organization for a change capability. For those of you who didn't need to raise your hand that you have a bold sponsor for capability, where are the additional opportunities for continuing to build the coalition for mitigating some of that risk? Because I guarantee that there is opportunity for boldness in each story in the room. So what we'd like you to do is do some personal reflection, and then because we're going to force you into socialization, after you've taken some time to write down your own thoughts, please share with your neighbor maybe what are the challenges that you're facing around bold sponsorship, and where are your opportunities for bold sponsorship, and then also where are the opportunities, probably most importantly, for you to be bold in your own story. So get to it. I have about 5 minutes. All right, let's come back. Sounds like you're having some good conversations. We want to keep going. Let's come back. Too many good conversations. All right, so raise your hand if you see that there's an opportunity for boldness in your own story. Does anyone not have an opportunity to be bold in their own capability story? I hope not. Cool.
So our next road sign along the way is find the energy. What does this mean? Well, Susie mentioned that on a normal day, our team is responsible and chartered with instilling readiness and handling change for system and process changes. So on the outside, we maintain a fairly expected and ordinary existence, but underneath it all, there's something much more heroic going on. And it's building change capability within our organization. It's not what pays our salary. Every minute, hour set against this more heroic battle is done on discretionary time. So it's the 46th hour of the week. It's the 56th hour of the week. And so our commitment and focus on it ebbs and flows, as does the IT portfolio. This year, we've spent a total of 4 hours, count them, 4. We're very proud of those 4 because it's a crazy year in IT, but it also saddens us that we are not able to spend more time focusing on building the capability. So how do we decide then? How do we decide when to put on that superhero costume? Just like most superheroes, it's when we're asked for help. And we call this going where the energy is. Unlike the picture, we're not necessarily kicking in the doors, but where we are asked to come and be and provide guidance, it's where we go. So we have some plans. We do what we're supposed to when it comes to enterprise change management. We have some milestones we're looking at, but we hold those plans very loosely. And instead, we respond where there's a pull. It's not going to work if we're out there saying, this is what you need, you got to get some of this enterprise change capability stuff. Instead, it's when we're asked for it, when we're asked for help, and that's where we spend our time. We had some early wins when, for the very first time, October of 2013, there was a program happening at Citrix called Sales Transformation. It was a McKinsey-run initiative. But interestingly, their contract did not include any change management, to help the transformation actually be a transformation. So the poor program manager, who was also very wise, said this is going to be a problem. And he had heard about our team and kind of unburied us from under the IT system changes and said, can you guys help? I want to upskill our program team and teach them at least a little bit about how to lead change management, or else I don't think we're going to be successful. So we said, yes, of course we can do that. We had no idea what we were doing, but of course we can do that. And we, sure enough, within 48 hours, we had pulled together an 8-hour workshop and put it in front of our first pilot group, and it went really, really well. They really, really liked the ADKAR model, and they started talking about it with fellow leaders, and then those leaders started calling us, and we said, yes, we can do whatever you want us to do. We can come talk about it for 10 minutes. We can talk about it for 2 hours. We can do 8 hours. We can do 3 days. We would do whatever they asked us to do. And that's part of what has happened in our maturity. Now, rather than doing whatever they ask us to do, we ask them, what are you trying to achieve? We can talk a little bit, we can talk a lot, but what do you want to have happen when this is done? And it shifted our role from that of order taker to that of strategic partner, and it's completely changed the conversation. Looking at our journey, our timeline, we started in 2011. Some of you may have been part of a presentation that James Chisholm and I gave a couple years back on the experience change simulation, and that really kicked us off with some energy in 2011. And then it grew to the point where we really needed to engage in a site license agreement with Prosci because we wanted to customize and we wanted to make this right for our customer and talk about ADKAR the way it made sense at Citrix. And then it started to gain a little bit more momentum. So I'm happy to say that as hard as it's been, as hard as those lessons have been, the momentum continues, and we're at about 10% of our organization who speak the language of ADKAR and who have some fluency in what that really means in terms of application. So where's the energy today? First and foremost, it's on project delivery. As I mentioned, we have a huge IT portfolio, and we truly believe that delivering outcomes on project work is our ticket to the dance. If you don't have that ticket, no one's going to want to listen. So that continues to be our central focus. We've also begun this year to explore opportunities to be thought leaders, both internal to our organization and external to customers of Citrix. And we started to do this in simple ways, blogging on citrix.com about issues implementing technology with end users who don't want to use it. Fancy that, we do that all the time, so we can talk a little bit more about that to others. And then really doubling down on our partnerships. This was never meant to be something we ourselves would own. It was always meant to be shared and scaled across the organization. So especially within our HR function, with our HR business partners and our learning and development professionals, we've continued to build those bridges and really talk about, think about, and put into action, how does this work in partnership?
So for a lot of organizations like at Citrix, the enterprise capability is growing out of maybe someplace that's not its ideal home. And so we get asked at Prosci quite a bit, what is the ideal home for a change management function to own a capability? And so in our research, we do ask that question. We ask people, where does it live? Where would you love for it to live? And what are the attributes of a successful home for change management? So where it does most commonly live is in the PMO, HR, and IT. And if people could put it anywhere that they want, they would put it also aligned in the PMO, under strategy and transformation, or aligned directly to the C-suite. And when you think about successful attributes of a successful CMO, access to enterprise-wide projects is key, leadership support, and honestly, momentum for it. And so while your home for change management, that might be just within your own heart right now at your organization. It may not be the ideal spot, but my guidance and what we've seen again and again is that it's going to evolve over time anyway, and wherever there is passion and momentum and energy for it, and hopefully the leadership access is where it should be right now. There is another challenge associated with where it lives, though, that can actually be where there's maybe too much energy for wanting to own the capability in the organization that's coming out of two places. And that often results in a turf battle for control. A lot of parts of the organization, they say, well, change management really should be in our house because we do this, this, and this that aligns with it. And someone else has an equally valid case for why change management should live in their part of the organization because they have this, this, and this that aligns with it. And so we have energy, that precious energy for building capability, but instead it is turned towards who gets to control it, who gets to pick the tool set and the approach and determine the curriculum and make the decisions. And in no case have I seen that ever lead to a more change-capable organization. It's wasted energy. And so if you have this, or if you run into it, because even if you're not facing it now, it's quite likely that it might come up, what I've seen work really well is someone has to be the first to reach out and say, you know what, we both care about this, we both have a vested interest in change management, let's bring our unique skills to the table, our unique reach into the organization to the table, and talk about how we can make progress together. Now in that approach, there is still friction and tension. It's not all just rosy because we decide to collaborate, right? And at some point, a part of the organization may need to assume formal ownership of the capability, but we're using that precious energy then towards making progress together and collaborating rather than just engaging in conflict that doesn't really get us anywhere. So a couple examples of this, I have seen this work really well with IT transformation and OD, completely different skill sets, completely different reach into the organization, honestly. And they come together and they say, we can bring our process strength, you can bring your competency building strength, let's do this together. I don't know if anyone was here last year, Tyco presented, and they were able to make immense progress in their capability in a pretty quick amount of time. And how they kicked that off was one of the coolest couple days that I've seen. They brought any leader that was interested in change management together, and they had everyone from mergers and acquisitions, procurement, so not some of the traditional players, right? And learning and development and HR and IT. And they all said, we all can touch 5,000 to 10,000 different people. Let's do this together. And so I would just encourage you in your organization, as you are finding the energy, to make sure that you are using that precious resource as effectively as possible, and don't waste a drop of it engaging in unnecessary conflict. And if you're looking for the right home for your organization, engage with those other groups in a positive way because you never know where the evolution is going to go. And if you build as many positive bridges like Citrix has, then your opportunities just open for ideal placement in the future. Because I've literally never talked to anyone that's like, the organization is ours. We get to put change management wherever we want to. Where should we do it? So build those bridges and keep looking for those opportunities and keep your eyes open. So, we want to give you time again to reflect on your organization, in your story. Where does change management currently live? I think that'll be a really interesting one too to talk to your table mates about. Where's the energy right now for change management, and are you using it? And is there untapped energy that you can leverage going forward, and how? So I'll give you another few minutes to reflect on those. All right, we're gonna pull you back. The volume is escalating, which makes me feel like we're probably talking less about like capability and more about the party tonight. Who's ready for some line dancing? All right. Raise your hand. Who sees untapped energy in their organization? Energy that they can tap into. Fantastic. It's everywhere if we start to think about it that way. Right? It's like oil. Just keep popping up. All right. So with that, we're going to start moving on to something that's important to everyone here. So if you haven't already, go ahead and cast your vote, although it does look like we have a front runner. Unless anyone wants to throw the vote for defining ACM for your company. So we want to talk about what's important to everyone in this room, right? Because I think we all face challenges. That's what we're here to talk about. So we'll talk about KPIs and measuring impact. So raise your hand if you have experience maybe measuring impact of a change capability. Okay, good. I'm remembering your faces because we're going to crowdsource this answer just as much as the question itself, okay? So KPIs and measuring impact. This is something for a change capability. We we can apply actually some of the same measurement frameworks that we do for projects, but from Prosci's perspective, we do have a maturity model. We look at it in terms of maturity from, an organization from 1 to 5, 1 being that there's really no consistent change management. It's kind of just absent or very ad hoc, through it's an embedded part of how the organization does business, approaches projects, approaches leadership. And so how we assess it is on that 1 to 5 scale across 5 capability areas. And so it provides a helpful baseline. And usually when people are looking at measuring, I'm like, make sure you do one right now. One, because we all tend to think maybe we're a little ahead of where we are, and that can be real eye-opening in actually doing a maturity assessment or something like that. My guidance, though, too, is that the numbers are great, and we do need to quantify, but often the discussion and the narrative that comes out of doing the assessment is as valuable as the number, especially if you do have cross-functional collaboration on the capability. So much comes out of a discussion about where the organization really is at today. So then not only do you have a baseline that you can measure against, but you're going to find out a lot of information that you didn't know by doing that. And then I'd encourage you to use that to measure maturity over time and see the progression, and also to orient across kind of which capability area you need to focus on. So that's how we approach it, but I think there's a lot of different experience here in the room too, so we want to turn it over to you. But Amy, do you have?
Yeah, I'll just add, one of the key things that I think we've all heard is to apply change management to building enterprise change management capability. One of the things that I am so excited about that Sarah Carr and Janice Toledo would be so happy to talk with you guys both. If you guys can just raise your hands in case anyone wants to find you. But these two on our team have really led the development of a new tool for us, which is all about leading indicators. So we apply it to our project work, but really looking at 15 leading indicators. So we're not looking back and saying, we went live, it didn't work, where's our barrier point? We're looking forward to say, if these things aren't in place week over week, what's the likelihood this change is in a state of risk, and how big is that risk? And it changes the conversation to what are we doing to mitigate that risk? Because we don't want to say risk is bad, we live in a state of risk, but we want to have more conversations about what's the plan to mitigate. So just like we do that for projects, we're doing that for ECM. So we're talking about, let's manage this thing like we manage our projects. And what does that look like? What's our sponsorship look like? Do we have deliverables in place? Do we have the resources we need? Things like that we know are the things that make or break our change initiatives. But to turn it over to all of you, we want to hear from you. So what kind of KPIs and measuring impact, what things are you prototyping, what have you seen work? We would ask that you wait for a mic because this is being streamed, so Natasha's going to be getting the mic to you as soon as we can, but please share your thoughts. Let's make this a discussion forum.
I just saw a lot of hands up that are not up now. So. Yeah. Has anyone had success with this? Or even if you're still working through it, what are you trying?
Great. Awesome. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name's Sean.
Give it one more try.
My voice, there it goes.
There you go.
Okay. So I work for Kroger, and I'm involved in our mobile app team, as well as Clicklist, which is online shopping, those kind of capabilities. But inside a very traditional organization, some of you, depending where you are in the country, were Fry's and Ralph's and other things like that. But anyhow, I did very recently, I went to the ECM boot camp in February, the maturity audit for 2 teams of folks. I'm in what's called Kroger Technology. So I come out of IT, where OCM exists. And I had a group of leaders there, and we went through it together because I wanted to get consensus on the responses, and it prompted some great discussions. And then I did it with some of the people in the business, which I go to several days a week outside of KT, got completely different results. And so that was very interesting to me. But what was important to me on those tools is I could sit in a cube and come up with what I think the answers are, and in many cases they weren't anywhere close to what I was getting from a consensus. And I think to the point you made earlier, they do prompt additional conversations, and even took some action items out of just doing the audit. So the measurements will be getting those low numbers higher over time.
Great, cool. Yeah, so I think, not just cross-functional, but throughout the layers of the organization, you see a lot of different things coming out. So if you're trying to baseline where you currently are at, don't necessarily rely on people who don't have that day-to-day exposure of how change actually happens in the organization. That's a great insight. Who else is working on measuring your change capability and where you're at?
My name's Brandy Abel. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. And I'm with Tier 1, and we work with a lot of clients, and two ways that we measure the impact of change. One is through the typical surveys, measuring as we're going through, are people buying in? And we do a lot of interviews, and that just has a tremendous impact on understanding that data. Really gets at, are you buying in for real, or are you just saying that you're buying in? And you can hear it in their voices when you talk to them. The other thing that I would call out that we try to do that's really important is we don't have separate KPIs. We have the business KPIs. So whatever the project goals are, how are we contributing to achieving those? And are we on track? And are we adding steps to the process? Are we adding time to the process? Do we have enough reports that will allow us visibility to measure those things? So just keeping in mind what the business value is and what those KPIs are, and that's what we try to achieve.
Great insight.
Oh, I see another hand over here. Oh. Now they all come.
Hi, my name is Maureen Farmer. I work in PPD in Raleigh, North Carolina, and it's a contract research organization. And over the past 2 years, we have built a practitioner network, and we use the Prosci methodology as well. And so we've been building this network, building out these standards, and now we've been asked, now what? Like, how can you make sure it's working? So what we've been focusing on now is building like a dashboard and trying to identify our activities of change management and tying that into pulse surveys, pulling in that ADCAR, that adoption measures from the end users, and then also doing retrospective analysis of case studies that didn't have change management compared to projects that did have change management to see the delta of the outcomes and where those projects landed. So we're pulling all that together and trying to build out dashboards. So that's where we're at.
Awesome. I think we have some other hands over here. Another one back there. I think that's really interesting too, that part of while you're also measuring the impact, you're going to be building, making progress and building the case kind of in all different stages throughout the organization. So as you continue to measure progress in some areas, you can turn that around into business case for other parts of the organization too, because you're probably never going to be like moving just linearly through the capability throughout the whole organization at one time. So leveraging where you can find the wins to turn that into more wins as kind of success breeds success.
Hi, my name is Tuba Cookland. I am with JP Morgan Chase. One of the things that we are working on right now towards kind of building that capability is a change leadership program. So I know it may not necessarily be a KPI, but one of the things we're looking to accomplish is actually measuring the skill levels of our leadership and understanding where they are today, and based on the investment that we make in those managers, how are they going to grow in their change journey and build upon the skills that they have. So we're trying to quantify that value for the time being.
Great, yeah, actually quantifying the competency, the progress there.
Yeah, and I love that too because it has the measurement aspect to it. Our performance management system and our competencies at Citrix include leading change as a competency, but yet really defining what are those behaviors that designate a great change leader from an average change leader, and are we being honest in the assessments? Do we really know what that looks like? So I think that you're onto the secret sauce there of really getting specific about those behaviors.
Hi, my name is Juana Ladara. I work at Vanguard, and I am part of a multi-year transformational program that will affect people, process, technology over a long period of time. And I would add, we'll do pulse survey as well, but something very important that we are doing, it's a self-assessment within the transformation program. Since we are actually a team implementing change, it's not just important to look on the outside and find out how people perceive change, but how do we feel about the change and how do we feel that we're executing. And lastly, we also do communication effectiveness, again, internally and externally. Is there a way that we could perhaps carry out messages better, have open communication channels, different than we are doing.
Absolutely. Self-assessment is really interesting to me too. When we're working with senior leaders, we have them do like a competency assessment on themselves, and they're like, oh, it's really eye-opening for them. But then it also shifts, the responsibility and the accountability on them to raise their own number and measure themselves. And then it also opens a discussion if you're in a position where you get to work with senior leaders or coach them to use that as kind of the springboard for your conversation. Did you have it?
We'll take one more, I think.
One more right there.
Hi, I'm Amanda Schmolt from USAA. We've been working on both KPIs and measuring impact over the last few years, and we've looked at measuring impact not just on an individual change, but how do we then aggregate all of those impacts and add them up so we can figure out how much change is too much when it's impacting any one part of our organization. From a KPI perspective, we're looking, similar to you, at those business metrics that have already been established for what do we consider to be success of the completed effort. And we're also starting with our strategic efforts to kind of tie that back to what are those change behaviors we want to see in our organization. So we can measure not just the KPI success at the achieving our goals level, but also how are we changing our culture appropriately to support those goals in the long run.
Very
Right.
cool.
Really good insights, which leads to our fourth and final road sign. I bet you forgot about the road signs. Our fourth road
didn't forget
sign
about you.
is don't go alone. So, I didn't get the clicker, but
we should have had a handoff.
fourth road sign is don't go alone, like I said. And I'm sure most of you in this room are familiar with leadership lessons from a dancing guy. Who's seen this? Yes, if you haven't, if your hand is down, YouTube immediately Simon Sinek and leadership lessons from a dancing guy.
Like after the session. So
Yeah, it's such a great, fun 3-minute way to explain what leadership and sponsorship is all about. But one of the key messages in this, which is essentially a man at a music festival who's dancing, and one by one, eventually a movement begins and other people begin to dance. One of the key messages that I think we can hold on to is that followers follow other followers. They don't follow the leader. And so it's very important as we begin to create a movement for enterprise change management and capability in our organizations to nurture our first followers. When someone gets excited about it, get equally as excited, mirror that excitement, and do what we can to help bring them along. The other piece is be prepared to dance by yourself for a really long time. One of our team members was actually at this event. We didn't know that when we hired her, and had we, she would have been a shoo-in right away. But she shared that actually she saw this guy dancing for a good 4 hours. So what you don't know in the video is it looks long for him at 45 seconds, but that was just the end of it. So be prepared to dance by yourself for a very long time. I think what we just heard in this room of the shared knowledge that we have, it's incredibly important to remember that this community exists for us. When things get rough and I run out of energy for this journey and I'm feeling particularly like that old woman, I remember that I have friends here at ACMP who have traveled this road, who have been here, who have more wisdom and knowledge than I do, or at least have an encouraging word to keep it up, to keep dancing. So please don't underestimate the power of this community and this group to encourage you along the way, as well as internally. Those folks internal to your organization, I'm so grateful for my team that I get to work with who can be that encouragement, and the others who have gradually become part of our coalition. So find those relationships, those connections, and really leverage the heck out of them. So, if you take anything from today, I hope you had fun. I hope you learned at least one nugget of new information and certainly had some time to reflect on some action you can take, whether that's about being bold, finding the energy, not going alone. And I hope you're excited that there's no finish line. Hopefully you've processed that by now. And we do invite you to continue the conversation. Susie and I will be at the Prosci booth tomorrow during breakfast. If you want to strengthen connections with each other, find each other there, and we'd be certainly happy to talk a little bit more about it.
So we really want to make sure, again, that this knowledge doesn't just stay in this room and not leave, and we want to make sure that you have some opportunity, again, to reflect on what are you going to do differently now. So on your worksheet at the very bottom, there's immediate tactics and long-term strategies. So we want to give you a few minutes, whether you do that now or towards the, after you leave this room, but make sure you capture some things that you're going to do differently. Maybe those are some immediate tactics of you can send an email right now to someone that you've been putting off like Amy did. Or maybe there's a long-term partnership of another part of the organization that you think there's a lot of energy that you can tap into, that you can collaborate with. So take a few moments and start jotting down what are you going to do now to be bold in your own ECM journey.
And while we're doing that, I think we have 5 minutes left. If we want to do some questions, whether that's to Susie and me or to the room as a whole, if you have any questions, certainly would love to spend the next 5 minutes continuing the conversation. If you don't have any questions, I'm going to ask you a question. So what are some road signs that you all have seen? So I shared my 4. What about you? What would you add?
Any truths, things that have emerged?
There's one over there.
Natasha's working hard.
Steep cliff. What's that? Say more.
Are you falling off the steep cliff?
I think with so much change happening, and I'm hearing at my table that there's a lot of saturation and fatigue, that this notion of finding your energy oftentimes just gets to be too much and people walk away.
Yeah,
And
that's saturation.
You always hate to see that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's kind of getting creative about how we look for that energy too. Find the positive energy. Really making sure that we fuel back up with one individual. Maybe it's a new employee who isn't as saturated yet, who gets really excited about this. But you're absolutely right. Saturation is so very, very real. Anybody else? What would you add?
It's your opportunity to speak truth. All right. Oh, I think we have
One in the back.
We're making you work. Work for it.
Someone back here? Thanks.
I would say keep calm or stay calm or be calm is a key road sign, because in any change, no matter what kind, people, process, or technology, there's always a lot of drama going on because the stakes are high in finance, or they're high in, people impacts, or they're high in what's happening to the company. And so if you have the ability, often I think we have to be the problem solver or the cheerleader, but often if we're just the center of calm in the situation as the change advisor or the change agent, the change professional, then we can have people come to us because we're providing that calm.
Yeah.
So.
That's a great one to add. Absolutely.
Yeah.
One more while we're in the back, and then we'll see if there's...
Thanks. So this is more of a question. Earlier when we were talking about leading indicators, one of the indicators I might have suggested would have been pipeline. To what extent has the ECM, Enterprise Change Management team, been able to secure a pipeline of demand for their services to the broader enterprise? So I guess my question is, with organizations you've worked with, do you find that a number of organizations with a formalized ECM are putting in place, call them business developers, or those who are reaching out in a more offensive way to identify new needs and to build pipeline?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that depends on kind of the authority to require it. And so I'd say from a proactive perspective, we've seen organizations go out and proactively say, can we become embedded in this process rather than try, for if they're looking from a project perspective, so that they don't have to go project by project, be like, hey, you want some change management on that project? Hey, you want some change management on that project? If they instead invest their energy on saying, can we become a checkpoint and a required part of our project process, if that is a thing, then they're hitting each one that goes through that. Because oftentimes, if they do have that maturity around their project process, then people have to use that process, and so then they kind of get into that, and so then they're not chasing individual opportunities. That takes a lot of energy usually, though, to chase that big opportunity to become embedded. So I've seen that work really well. Again, I see what I've seen is more pull than necessarily business development into the business for change. But Amy, thoughts on that as well, from how you guys handle projects and how that grew in IT?
Yeah, I think one of the insights that I'll share actually came from a book I read on the flight here. So this has not been tried out in our environment yet, but the book talked about looking at what's coming next. So thinking about not where are we today, what are the projects that are happening today, but what's going to be the next big thing for our company at an enterprise level strategically. Who's managing that? And then spend time getting to know that person before that project ever even becomes a reality. So I think that's what I challenge all of us to do, is to look ahead a little bit more. I think for most of us, and I'll just speak for myself, we're in a pretty reactive position in our organization. A project gets funded, we need to staff it, and we execute. Versus spending some time thinking about 12 months from now, what's going to be the big project that's going to be important, visible, and need change management, and then start to slowly and incrementally position ourselves to be there at the right place at the right time. All right, I think that's our wrap. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.